Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are in our 10th event, can you believe it, in this Outcomes Estimation Tools Training Webinar Series. And this time, we're featuring the Fertilizer and Soil tool, the FAST tool, designed to quantify greenhouse gas emissions, FAST-GHG. So thank you for being here today. As some of you hopefully know by now, I'm Michelle Perez, Water Initiative Director for American Farmland Trust, and I'm joined by my colleague, Water and Soil Health Scientist, Aisha Tapp-Ross. American Farmland Trust is a national nonprofit organization founded in 1980, and our mission is to save the land that sustains us by 1, protecting farmland, 2, promoting sound farming practices, and 3, keeping farmers on the land and preparing the next generation of farmers. So for today's webinar, here's just a few reminders, and after a few reminders and a quick poll to see who's in the room, we're going to hear from Peter Woodbury, Senior Research Associate with the Cornell School of Integrative Plant Science, Soil and Crop Sciences section. He'll first lead us in a presentation of the tool, and then we'll have a quick Q&A, and then he'll provide a demo of the FAST-GHG tool and 5 minutes to conclude the webinar. And then we'll have reserved the last 20 minutes for a second Q&A as well. We want to thank our funders, the EPA Office of Water, the Walton Family Foundation, and the Mosaic Foundation for making this webinar series possible. Aisha.
All right, and now for some quick housekeeping reminders. We are using the Zoom webinar platform for this series, so as attendees, you will have your camera and microphones turned off throughout the event. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen at any time to ask questions, and the speakers will answer the questions during the 2 Q&A sessions. You can use your name or be anonymous when asking questions or making comments. If you like a question someone else has asked, you can vote it up so it can be prioritized. And we also do have the capability to unmute you, so please indicate in the question if you would like to ask it yourself. If you're having any technical difficulties, you can direct message me and I'll try to help you out with those. And following each webinar, you will receive an email within 3 to 4 days that will provide the recording and the slides for the presentations, as well as information about the next month's speaker. And by the following Monday, we will post the recordings to the webinar registration page, which we absolutely welcome you to share with colleagues and friends that may be interested in viewing. In a moment, I'll be sharing a link to an 8-question anonymous evaluation survey that should take you about 2 minutes to complete. The survey will pop up when you leave, but you can also click it now so it opens in a new tab in your browser. We ask that you please complete the survey right after the event ends. Our presenters and the AFT team rely on these surveys to help inform our next month's speaker and any changes that we might need to make to the webinar series. Given the low survey participation rate in the past, we started offering an incentive. So everyone who fills out a survey today before 6 p.m. Eastern will be entered to win a $25 Visa gift card. The winner will be notified by email tomorrow morning, and we appreciate your participation and wish you luck in the drawing.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, we love it when we receive your survey responses. So we hope that you take literally 3 minutes to complete them and get that chance to win that Visa gift card. All right, so now we have time for some polls. Let's see who is in the room. Please answer these 3 questions for us. Which one sector best reflects your occupation? Are you with the government agency, non-government agencies on the private sector, academic institutions? Are you with a corporation or an environmental markets developer or other? Number 2, if there are only 4 types of audience members, which one best describes you? The first one, developer of outcomes estimation tools, methods, or models, a current user of these tools, methods, or model, a potential future user of these outcomes estimation tools, methods, or models, or a person who's interested in learning more about outcomes estimation tools and issues. Third and final poll question, what is your experience level with the FAST-GHG tool that will be taught today? Had not heard of it at all, the first choice. You've heard of it, but never used it. You've heard of it and you've used it, or I refer to it often. So thank you so much for taking just a few seconds to answer these 3 polls so we understand who's in the room. How are we doing, Aisha? Are they racing to our desired?
Pretty good. We're at 78%, so I usually stop it when we get to about 90.
Awesome.
We just got
Everyone.
a few more people.
Great.
Okay, we're at 85. So I'll stop in just a minute. $87.
We really should spring for the Jeopardy theme song.
All right. Well, we didn't quite get up to our 90, but I'm going to go ahead and end it.
All right. Let's see what the responses are. All right, the majority of folks are with a government agency, USDA, EPA, a state agency, or SWCD, or others. Just about half, more than half there. And then academic institutions, and then 4 or so persons from the NGO and the corporates and the other section. Cool. In terms of what type of audience member, half were potential future users. Excellent. That's terrific. Glad you found us, this webinar series. And a person generally interested in outcomes estimation tools as well, the next group. And then, wow, we have some developers of tools, neato, and current users, just 7%. All right. What's your experience level? Had not heard of it. Excellent. Today's the day. We're going to change that. Heard of it, but never used it. All right. Thank you so much. All right. What is our next near final slide? Here we go. So this is a screenshot of the registration page that all of you have used. And you can see that as we march forward, we provide links to every single event that has happened in the past. So if you happen to miss something and you want to watch it, you can just do so by clicking on these things. And at the top of this page, you can get to our Farmland Information Center website that houses the slides version of the talk. So if you don't want to listen, you can just forward through the slides, the PDF version of these slides. So next up, we have on March 6th, we're going to be joined by Michaela Aschbacher of the Cool Farm Alliance, who will present the Cool Farm Tool, a simple to use yet scientifically robust carbon accounting tool with tens of thousands of users in 150 countries, including the US. We hope you enjoy and join that event. And we're very excited to announce a new addition to our 2024 training. On April 3, we will have a critical source area identification and management training, because that was a topic that many who completed the needs assessment survey that was sent out at the very beginning of this webinar series, that you all showed an overwhelming interest in. So we found some speakers, and we're going to be hearing from them. First up is Shannon Phillips of the Water Quality Division of the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. We'll also hear from Tate Wentz, the Water Quality Division Manager of the Arkansas Department of Agriculture. And third will be Leif Kienberg, the Director of the Illinois River Watershed Partnership. So we're excited about that new offering on April 3rd. All right. Well, I think that's it, Aisha. We will, oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Turn it over to Peter right now.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Sorry about that. So I look forward to telling you about the FAST greenhouse gas tool, but we'll start with telling you just a little bit about myself. I'm a senior research associate at Cornell, as you've heard, and I do research on how to make agriculture and forestry more sustainable. So growing more food, feed, fuel, and fiber while improving environmental quality. So I do a lot of research on natural climate solutions. So that includes a range of land management activities, including tree planting, improved crop nitrogen management, improved manure management, and many other practices. And when I'm not doing science, I really like to play Brazilian music, samba. So I play various kinds of percussion, guitar, and I sing as well. But today you won't get to hear my musical skills. Instead, I'm going to talk about the FAST greenhouse gas tool. So these are the 5 topics that we're going to cover. I'm not going to read them all, but the gist of it is to tell you a little bit about where the tool came from, why it was developed, and demonstrate some examples of how to use the tool and to interpret the results, and to explain how you might be able to use the tool on your projects. So 3 of us at Cornell developed the tool, Christina, Tanito, Dominic, Wolf, and myself. And it was developed with support from the Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability in partnership with Environmental Defense Fund and the Nature Conservancy. The goal was to make it easy to use both at the farm scale and also for the supply chains of major corporations. And specifically, we were developing a tool that could be used by Walmart to support their Project Gigaton effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from their supply chains. And it was launched in September 2020 for that purpose. The tool is also available as an open source online calculator. And I'll be showing a demonstration a little later in the presentation of that online tool. It includes cover crops, tillage, nitrogen fertilizer management for 3 important commodity crops, corn, soybean, and wheat, throughout the USA, except for Hawaii and Alaska. So how does the FAST greenhouse gas tool work? Well, we integrate a number of sources of information. So this is based on the 3 of us who developed this have a lot of expertise in this topic. So we synthesized scientific data to produce this tool. We also provide default data. So it's not required to have farm-specific data. And those data come from the National Agricultural Statistics Service and other government databases. For example, we have soil properties from national soils databases. And the effort here is to really make rigorous calculations developed by scientific experts and reviewed by additional scientific experts. So here's just a little bit more about how the tool works. We build on multiple previous research projects by our team and by many other teams. And we look at the greenhouse gas emissions from soil, machinery, and fertilizer. The tool also analyzes changes in soil carbon and nitrogen over time. And one feature of the tool is whenever possible, we base the core result on for these practices such as tillage and cover crops, a core part of the tool is using long-term experimental data. So we use that whenever possible. So I'm not going to read this whole slide, and you don't need to either, but this is just to say that the tool consists of a number of equations. So this equation calculates the net avoided carbon dioxide emissions from implementing a practice. So something to keep in mind with the tool is that it estimates the greenhouse gas benefit of a particular practice. So it's not analyzing the greenhouse gas emissions of a baseline separately from the result. It's just giving you what is the greenhouse gas benefit of implementing the practice. So that's for CO2. This is the equation for these net avoided carbon dioxide emissions. And the equation has a number of factors here that get calculated within the tool behind the scenes. I won't go through all these, but you'll see some familiar things I just mentioned: changes in soil carbon, emissions from machinery use, and emissions from agricultural inputs. So this is a snapshot of the tool to just summarize, again, some of the key attributes that might help you decide whether it will meet your needs. So it operates at the field level, and it predicts an average value based on either default input data or site-specific input data. The outcome is the greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So you get a total estimate of the greenhouse gas benefit, as well as a breakdown into 7 source categories. The conservation practices that are covered include cover crop. That includes legume, non-legume, or mixed, tillage, and fertilizer management. The production systems or land uses are commodity crop production, and that includes corn, wheat, and soybean. It is for just for all US states except Alaska and Hawaii. In terms of the difficulty of using the tool, it is easy to use. It has a web interface, and you can get a result with as few as 3 clicks. If you use some of the options to put in some of your own input data or take some of the advanced options, you can get up to 11 clicks to get results. So these are some of the key strengths of the FAST greenhouse gas tool. So it's directly accounting for the effects of several important management practices. It can make estimates with no farm-specific data, and that was important for it to be useful for users such as Walmart, who really do not have information about the specific locations that their supply chain is coming from. It is designed to make improved estimates if you have farm-specific data on crop yield and nitrogen fertilizer rate. And it's grounded in a mechanistic understanding of carbon and nitrogen cycles, as well as results of long-term field experiments. And lastly, it's publicly available and thoroughly documented. Now, what are some of the limitations of the tool? Well, the first one is that the default data for nitrogen fertilizer rate are not suitable for most purposes for several states that have high livestock populations. So instead, we recommend to use the advanced input option to define the nitrogen rate. The tool also does not include the use of manure. It focuses instead on inorganic nitrogen fertilizer. The units are metric and not English. And it can't include all of the variations in practices and conditions among farms. Another limitation is that the publicly available online version operates for a single combination of crop, location, and management practice. We do not currently have resources to provide user support, but you will have my contact information. You're welcome to try to contact me if you're using it and have a question or a problem, and I'll do what I can. There is also a series of frequently asked questions and extensive documentation. So that hopefully can help answer many questions. And how is FAST greenhouse gas different from other tools? Well, some of these are some of the important features, and it shares some of these with other tools, but some are not very commonly implemented in other tools. So it is grounded in the results of field experiments, and we think that's important whenever possible. It also includes a number of effects or factors that aren't included in most tools. And these include additionality, so meaning have you gone beyond a baseline practice? Fertilizer manufacturing, there are quite a few greenhouse gas emissions associated with nitrogen fertilizer production. Leakage, which I'll discuss and define a little bit later. Fuel use, so this is on-farm fuel use by tractors, emissions associated with that. And permanence, and I'll discuss that a little more as we get into using the tool as well. It does report 7 different source categories, so you get more than just a single number for your output. It also reports the details of the calculations, and I'll be showing that in the demonstration as well. Okay, so I'm going to do an offline demonstration of the tool now. And then we'll have a little bit of question and answer time, and then we'll do an online demonstration of the tool as well. So this is the screen you get when you open the online tool. So when you open this, you see some input values here. You can choose this. You can choose the state and the county that you're located in. You can choose the crop, and you can choose which the management practices you'd like to include. Now I'm going to show 4 examples of using the tool for a single crop in a single location. So the 4 management practices are there. This is all for corn, for a county in New York State. I picked the one where I'm located. So the 4 practices are a legume cover crop, a non-legume cover crop, precision nitrogen fertilizer management, and reduced tillage. And all of these different examples are for the same location, the same crop yield, and the same nitrogen rate, that is before the practice was implemented, and also on the same soil type. So this is the result for a legume cover crop. The bottom, at the very bottom, it's showing the avoided greenhouse gas emissions. And a positive value is a good thing. So the green bar here means good, which means we're reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And the green bar shows the total reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from using a cover crop. And the units are carbon dioxide equivalents per hectare per year. So most of you, many of you may be familiar with carbon dioxide equivalents. But again, as a reminder, there are 3 important greenhouse gases in agriculture. Carbon dioxide is actually the least important in agriculture. Nitrous oxide and methane are much more important. And in terms of crop production, it's really nitrous oxide that's the most important gas. Methane is important for livestock. So this bottom green bar shows the total. And the black bars up above, so the green bar is the total. And then the black bars up above are these 7 source categories. So if we add up each of the source categories, meaning each of these black bars, then the total is the green bar. So we see that we are getting a benefit for nitrous oxide emission. The black bar is going to the right. So we're reducing nitrous oxide emissions. We're also reducing nitrogen fertilizer production. So this is the greenhouse gas emissions associated with producing the fertilizer that we didn't need to use. So by using a legume cover crop, we've reduced the fertilizer rate that's required. The next bar down is inputs. So cover crops require some input. They require seed and other materials to implement the practice. So there's a small, there's a financial cost, but in this case, we're showing the greenhouse gas cost of those inputs. There's also some additional fuel required for planting and terminating the cover crop. So there are emissions associated with that fuel. And lastly, of the 7 source categories here, soil carbon, soil organic carbon, abbreviated SOC, is increasing. So we're getting some benefit from that. So these are showing just the three of these source inputs were positive and 2 of them were negative. Here's the next example. This is a non-legume cover crop. And the first thing you probably notice is the bar at the bottom is red. And I apologize to any of you who are red-green colorblind. It is also, the bar is pointing towards the left, and it's a negative value. So in this graph, the negative values are always a bad thing. They are always an increased greenhouse gas emission. So unlike the legume cover crop, the overall greenhouse gas impact of a non-legume cover crop is actually an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Now, why is that happening? There is a benefit for soil organic carbon as one of the source categories. However, there are 4 bars here that are negative. The top one is nitrous oxide emissions, and the next one is fertilizer production. So what's going on here? Well, what's happening is that often with a non-legume cover crop, it's required to add additional nitrogen fertilizer to make sure the subsequent crop has adequate nitrogen fertilizer. So there's an increase in emissions associated with that. Just as for the legume cover crop, we have also some emissions associated with the inputs for the cover crop and the fuel that's used. The next example is precision nitrogen management. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, what this practice means a little bit later, but it involves just improving the timing and the rate of nitrogen fertilizer application. So in this case, there's only 2 source categories that contribute to the total, and that's nitrous oxide emissions and fertilizer production. So with this precision nitrogen management, we've reduced the amount of fertilizer, and that has given us a greenhouse gas benefit, both in the field as well as the upstream emissions from nitrogen fertilizer itself. So the last of the 4 examples here for corn in Tompkins County is no-till. So we see at the bottom, the green bar pointing towards the right. So no-till decreases net greenhouse gas emissions. And that is due mostly to reduced use of fuel, and to a much smaller extent due to an increase in soil carbon. I'm going to give one more example for this same location, but this time using wheat and no-till. So remember, we just looked at an example of corn with no-till, and now we're going to look at the same location, an example of wheat with no-till. So unlike for corn, we're getting the red bar and the negative value is showing that we have an increase in greenhouse gas emissions from no-till in wheat. And the big contribution here is leakage. So there's a very large bar for leakage as a source category. So what is that about? Well, what that's about is based on long-term field experiments, there can often be a small yield decrease with no-till and wheat, depending on the conditions. So the idea of leakage, it's really an economic term. And the idea is if we produce 4% less yield, the demand for wheat still exists. So somebody is going to want to have that wheat produced somewhere else. And there will be greenhouse gas emissions associated with that wheat production somewhere else, the 4% of missing wheat that's needed to meet the market demand. This is a difficult thing to estimate, but these are globally traded commodities, and that's important to remember. So this is creating a demand for wheat production somewhere else in the world. And this estimate is based on the average greenhouse gas emissions associated with that increased demand somewhere in the world. The FAST greenhouse gas tool also has advanced inputs. So far we've just selected the crop and one of the 3 management practices. But now I'll show you how you can use the advanced inputs. So right at the bottom of this initial openings web page for the tool, there's a box that says Show Advanced Inputs. And if you click on that, you get the option for 3 different inputs. You can input the crop yield using this slider. You can input the nitrogen fertilizer rate. And you can also input something about the risk that cover cropping will cease within the next 100 years. So what is this about? This is because climate change is a long-term problem. Carbon dioxide in particular stays in the atmosphere a very long time. So we need the solutions to be long-term as well. So if we just practice cover cropping for 3 years, and then we don't practice it anymore for many decades, we're not going to get the benefit in terms of soil carbon accumulation. So we use a 100-year period for estimating the benefit of these practices. And that's a long time period, but it is a reasonable choice given the long-term nature of the climate change issue. So if you feel absolutely confident that you're going to be doing cover cropping for the next 100 years, you can set this value to 100%. We set the default at 50%. And of course, this is an unknown. We're not going to be able to predict the future. The reason we include this is that soil carbon is not permanent. And so this risk factor helps us account for the fact that soil carbon can be gained, but it can also be lost again. So these are the 3 different options under the advanced inputs. So some of you may be wondering if you can use the FAST greenhouse gas tool for a large project that might involve multiple fields and multiple farms and multiple years. The answer is that in terms of the online tool is a qualified yes. So you can only use it for multiple fields and farms and locations if you have a single combination of location, crop, and management practice. So the results are actually, as we mentioned, in carbon dioxide equivalents per hectare per year. So if you had 50 fields in a single county and they all had the same crop and the same management practice, then you would get, you can get one result from the tool and apply it to all 50 fields by multiplying the total area for that combination. So this can work relatively easily using default data on yield and nitrogen rate. But if you have farm-specific data on different yields and nitrogen rate for each field, you'll have to run them separately. So now I'm going to say just a little bit about how you can get more information about the tool. And there's a number of different ways to do it. The first way is you can hover over some text and get a pop-up. So here I'm showing that we're hovering over tillage practice, and we're getting this black pop-up box that defines the 3 different tillage practices: conventional, reduced till, and no-till. And you can hover over other practices to get a definition of them as well. There's other ways to get information from the tool. So far, we've just looked at the results screen, but there are 4 tabs. So we have results, calculations, about, and FAQs. So we're going to choose the calculations tab now. So we've chosen the calculations tab, and it's showing us the user inputs. And if we scroll down, we get what's called derived parameters. So these are calculations in the model using the information that you put in and a lot of other information to make predictions of a number of things that go into the calculation. So based on the location you've selected, we have information about the climate, the moisture regime, the soil type. We also have a default average yield value for each of the crops. So by looking at this, you can see what is the assumption if you use the default yield value. What exactly is that yield value? And there's a number of other parameters you can find out what they are just by clicking that calculations tab. And if we scroll down further, we can get some of these values from the output. So we can get a change in direct nitrous oxide emissions, a change in overall nitrous oxide emissions, or a change in yield if you want to see what's happening with the yield when you implement the practice in the model. So here's just an example showing you can get the amount of emissions associated with leakage. Another option for getting information is to click the FAQ tab here at the top. So that's circled in yellow. And you get a small number of frequently asked questions. And if you're using the tool and you have a question that doesn't appear here, please do send it to us and we'll do our best to answer it. So here's an example of one of the frequently asked questions. The soil organic carbon change in fast greenhouse gas seems low compared to other calculators. Why is that? Well, the reason is we include a number of factors that aren't included in many tools. So we talked about permanence, the risk that a practice may not be continued indefinitely, and the fact that soil carbon can be lost as well as gained. Another thing that happens with soil carbon is we can keep adding soil to carbon in the form of residues. We can keep adding it to soils, but eventually we'll reach a new equilibrium of how much carbon can be stored in the soil. It will not keep increasing indefinitely. And we also have an FAQ, the third one here, that talks a little bit about why we use the long time horizon. So you can explore that and the other FAQs yourself. The last kind of way to get information about the tool is that we have a document that provides all of the equations and all of the source data that go into the tool. And this is available for download. For those of you who might be tool developers, the code is also publicly available. Okay, well, we finished the first segment of my presentation, and I'm very happy to take some questions now if you have any. We will also have another question and answer period at the end. That's after great. The online demonstration.
That's great, Peter. Thank you. We do have 2 questions. Oh, look, 3. Keep them coming, folks, if you would like to take advantage of this Q&A session right now. Megan Tenhoff asked 2 questions. The first was, how large does the farm have to be to get results?
Great question. The calculation is done for a single hectare, but you can take that result for a single hectare and multiply it by all the hectares in the field or farm. And if you had a field that was smaller than a hectare, you could also divide that per hectare result. So there's no restriction on the area that could be used for the model.
Great. Megan's second question was, when might we expect to be able to use the tool for specialty crops?
Unfortunately, we have no funding and no plans to expand to specialty crops. The next one of the things that there are some things we hope to improve in the tool in the next year, but we do not have a firm date for completing that. We are hoping to provide a English units option for the inputs and the outputs, and we're hoping to improve the ability to get a printed kind of report out. So I demonstrated how you can get a variety of results and information about it, but we'd like to have the option where you could click a button and get a report that shows you a lot of that information in a single report. In the future, if we have funding, we would like to include manure management on these same crops. And we are not, as I say, we have not, it's not on our horizon to include specialty crops, unfortunately.
All right. Third question from Paul Julian of Everglades Foundation. Could this tool be developed in the future to include other crops like sugarcane? What data was used to calibrate the model? Did it include high organic soils, that is, former peat histosoil soils?
Good question. The tool could be expanded to other crops. It would be a considerable amount of work. So there'd be some scientific synthesis, and that would be required for other crops. The second question was about highly organic soils, also called histosols. Mm-hmm. And
if you wanted to read them, you could click on the Q&A button yourself.
Sure.
Of course, I can try to repeat them, but seeing them also helps.
Yes, thank you. So histosols are not currently included. We do use different soil information for each county in the country, but we estimate the typical most common soil that's used for commodity crops within those counties. So the tool could be expanded to use histosols, but it doesn't currently have an option where you could select the soil type. That's something else we would like to provide in the future if we can, is the ability to at least choose a soil texture group. So something like a sandier soil, silty soil, clayey soil, or a histosol. But again, we don't currently have that ability.
Cool. Paul Julian wrote back saying, cool, makes sense, thanks. And the final question comes from John Winston. Hello, John. How do the conference intervals differ with farm-specific information versus default? And you might want to, I'll just read it out for everyone's benefit, but there's a lot of questions here. What types of combos can be done with non-public version? Is the risk at 50% by default, even if you do not select advanced inputs? Is there a direct relationship between the amount of reduced yield and the leakage estimate? And he writes, permanence risk following up. And another question, are costs per milligram CO2e calculated?
Great. So I'll go through each of these as kind of a separate question. So how do the confidence intervals differ with farm-specific information versus default? Good question. We do not provide confidence intervals on the results. So when we say that we expect that you get more robust results by putting in farm-specific information, we haven't proven that, if you will. But if you use the default values, you're using the average yield in the county for that crop over the entire county and over many years, and you're using the average estimated nitrogen fertilizer rate. So those are used within the calculations of the model. So if you provide a better estimate of those, then it's logical that you'll get a result that's better tailored to your field. So what type of combos can be done with the non-public version? I think the question here is, can you stack practices or can you implement more than one practice at once? And the answer is yes, you can combine any and all. You can combine any of the practices with each other. You'd have to pick one option within each practice. So you obviously couldn't combine reduced till with no till, but you could combine a reduced till with a legume cover crop with an advanced nitrogen management. And I'll show that in the online demo in just a few minutes. The third question, is the risk of 50% by default, even if you do not select advanced inputs? Yes, the default assumption is that if you're implementing cover crops, that there's a 50% chance that that's going to continue for 100 years. Obviously, none of us can make that prediction. But again, the reason it's important to use some number here and to have people aware of it is if you think the likelihood's only 10%, you're not going to get a very large benefit. So there's an educational component to that of how important that factor really is in terms of the climate benefit. The next question, is there a direct relationship between the amount of reduced yield and the leakage estimate? Yes. The leakage estimate, if you don't see any result for leakage, that's because the model is estimating that there's no change in yield. Conversely, if you see that there's a leakage result as a source category in the results, then that means that the yield changed. So far, we've talked about a decrease in yield being a negative thing, meaning it causing an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. In the online demo, I'll show that you can also have a positive benefit from leakage if the practice increases yield. The next question is, are costs per megagram carbon dioxide equivalent calculated? I assume this means financial costs, and the answer is no. We don't provide any cost information. And the last question, at least the last one that I'm seeing, is why not have combos be possible in the public version? Well, clearly I haven't communicated clearly. they are indeed possible in the public version. So you can combine any of the practices together. What I was saying is, if you want to run, you can only run one combination at a time. So there's not like a kind of a batch mode where you could say, okay, I have 50 fields, they all have different nitrogen rates, they all have different yields, they all have different practices. Well, using the online version of the tool, you'll have to run the model 50 times. Okay, and I see somebody, are there any additional questions at this time?
Well, I think actually to keep on schedule, why don't you go ahead and start the online demonstration?
Great.
Great.
Okay, are you seeing the tool?
Not yet. Not yet. No,
Okay.
it's still the PowerPoint.
All right. Okay, how about now?
That's it.
Excellent. Excuse me. Okay, so we've seen this before, and we're just looking at the live online version now. So we're going to take a little trip, at least for me. Maybe I'll be coming and landing someplace near you, but we're going to select the state of Iowa. And then use the pull down for the county, and we're going to, since I'm telling you a story today, we're going to choose Story County. And we're going to choose a legume cover crop. We're going to choose, sorry, I should have said, we'll choose maize or corn as the crop, and we'll choose a legume cover crop. So now I'm going to just show you what I mentioned before, that if we hover over these source categories, if I move the pointer up here, we don't have a pop-up box, but if I move it down over the source categories, I get a pop-up box that defines what are N2O emissions, what is leakage. So again, that's just one of the ways to get information when you're right here using the tool and you want to know what something means. That hovering and pop-up box is a good place to start. All right, so we can notice as soon as you select your crop and location and practice, you immediately get the results. And here we're seeing at the bottom, it's also giving you numerically what is the total result. So it's reminding that a positive value is a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions of 0.24 megagrams of carbon dioxide equivalent per hectare. So we've had several questions about combining practices. So now we're going to add reduced tillage. And we see that there's some changes in the source categories, and the total benefit is now 0.29. If we forgot what it was with the previous example with conventional till, we can just click on the conventional till button and say, oh yes, it was 0.24 with just a legume cover crop. If we add in reduced till along with the legume cover crop, we're getting an additional benefit. And I'll scroll down to the nitrogen fertilizer practices. And here I'll choose improved timing. And again, the results are a little different. And now we're getting a total of 0.41 megagrams of carbon dioxide equivalent. So we're seeing the benefit here of stacking multiple practices at the same time. All right. Now I'm going to stick with maize. I'm going to say no cover crop and conventional tillage, and we're just going to explore this nitrogen fertilizer practice a little. So now we can see that the result graph is not showing anything. And that's just, again, because we haven't chosen any practices yet. So if you don't choose an improved management practice, then the model's saying, I can't estimate the benefit of the practice till you tell me which practice you're using. So let's explore the nitrogen fertilizer practices here. There's 4 of them. I'm going to first show improved, so we can hover over them and get the definition of what they are. So improved timing is timing the nitrogen application to optimize the crop uptake. So that could include moving from fall to spring, or moving from pre-plant to a side dress application. So if we choose that, without any other practices, we're getting a benefit of 0.16 megagrams of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. What if we used a variable rate application? And now we're getting a benefit of 0.23 megagrams per year. And what if we use model-based optimization? Well, we're not getting any additional benefit above the variable rate application. So what's going on here is the model is only actually using one of these practices. So within nitrogen fertilizer practices, the model is going to pick the one that gives the most benefit if you select all 3 of them. Now, what's going on with this other category? If I select other under nitrogen fertilizer practice, we get no result at the moment. And that's because it's overriding these other 3. So when you choose other, then it doesn't matter whether you have the other 3 checked or not. So I'm going to uncheck them just to remind us we're focusing on other. And the other allows you to enter the reduction in nitrogen fertilizer application. So if you've done a change in your fertilizer management that has caused you to reduce your fertilizer rate, by 30 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year, we would enter a value of 30 here. And we're getting a decrease of 0.35 megagrams of CO2 equivalent per year. So if we're not sure how that compares to the other nitrogen fertilizer management practices, we can go back and select the model-based optimization, and that was 0.23. So by choosing other, and by choosing 30 kilograms of nitrogen reduction, we're getting an even larger benefit than any of the other nitrogen fertilizer practices. Of course, you'd have to have your own farm-specific data to use this other option. The other important thing is that you would need to be achieving this reduction in nitrogen fertilizer without reducing yield. All right, well, let's take a little trip to Missouri. I'll set these back to the initial state. And we'll scroll down here and choose Missouri. And we'll choose Lafayette County. we'll choose soybean with a mixed cover crop. So this means, again, we can get this is a mixed cover crop, including both legumes and non-legumes. All right, well, let's say we're just curious about, okay, what the model's using the average soybean yield in Lafayette County, but what is that yield? Is that close to the yield that I'm getting on my fields or not? So we can choose the calculations tab here and click on that. And as I mentioned before, that shows the inputs that we've put in. So it's showing the state and the county and the crop, the management practice. And let's scroll down. So down here under the derived parameters is the yield. So the average yield in Lafayette County in Missouri is 3,575 kilograms of grain per hectare per year. Well, gosh, on my field, I'm getting a lower yield than that. So how am I going to use the model? Well, we can go and show the advanced inputs. And I'm only getting 2,500 kilograms of soybean yield per hectare. So I'm going to change this crop yield down to 2.5 tons per hectare. And now we can go back and look at the results. And now we're only getting a benefit of 0.11 tons of CO2 equivalent. Well, I'll get rid of the advanced input again so we can remember what it was with the default yield value of 3,500. There it was 0.15 megagrams. So the overall benefit, if we go to the advanced input and we choose our 2.5 tons of yield per hectare, the overall benefit's a little bit smaller. Well, why might that be? Well, we see that there's a positive leakage value here. So what does that mean? That means, that seems like it should mean that there's a change in yield, a positive change in yield due to implementing the practice. Well, gosh, let's find out what that change in yield was. So we'll go back to the calculations and we'll scroll down. And in the calculation section here, there's a change in yield. So for this location and practice and yield, the model's estimating an increase in 95 kilograms of soybean per year. And that's what's causing that positive leakage value. So this is important to recognize with leakage, that something that we do that increases yield can also increase the greenhouse gas benefit. And that's, of course, of great interest to anybody who's interested in profitability as well as environmental performance. So the benefit here with our lower yield compared to the average yield in my county here of Lafayette, with the lower yield, the benefit's a little bit smaller because the yield hasn't increased quite as much when we started with a lower yield. All right, let's look at another example. So I'll set these back to their 0 values. And let's go back to New York for a moment. Now, some of you may be interested in looking at results averaged across an entire state. Well, you can do that by choosing the state. We chose New York, and by not choosing a county. If you choose unknown for the county, then you'll get the default. The default will be giving you the average result for the whole state. So we're going to go back to an example of wheat and no-till. Remember, in Tompkins County, New York, the overall effect of no-till on wheat was negative, meaning that greenhouse gas emissions increased. And that's occurring. The biggest reason is leakage. So again, we found in Tompkins County, there was a 4% decrease in yield. And across New York State, there's also a decrease in yield. Well, let's see what happens if we grow wheat with no-till in Oregon. Are we going to get the same result? It's the same crop and it's the same practice. Well, we get a very different result. And why do we get a different result in Oregon than in New York? Well, in this case, the leakage is positive. So it's a different climate, and the model is predicting, based on some long-term experimental data, that yield can actually increase in this in Oregon for wheat with no-till. So that changes the overall result quite a bit. And this is just showing that the model is incorporating information about the soils and climate, and that the results can be of the same practice and the same crop can be quite different in different locations. Okay, that's the end of my demonstration. I'm happy to take a few more questions.
Awesome. I enjoyed that a lot. Thank you. There's a long question here from an anonymous attendee after a thank you very much from John Winston above. So the anonymous person says, interested in hearing about your perspective on cover crop performance. Reduced nitrogen and additional nitrogen estimates from legume and rye cover crop are often associated with biomass of the cover crop, according to seeding date, GDD, or termination date. Is this effect small enough where trends hold, or do you have guidance on how tool users should interpret results? And spell out GDD for us, please.
So GDD is growing degree days. So it's a measure of kind of the cumulative warmth of the growing season. Okay, let me see if I can unpack this question. The topic is cover crop performance. So I think the question is about that cover crops, just like any other crop, can do well or poorly depending on the weather and the management and the timing, etc. So I think the question here is, do we have to worry about, how effective, how much the cover crop grew? Did we have a big healthy cover crop or poor germination or poor growth? Yes, that would affect the results. The model assumes that you have an effective cover crop. So it's based on experimental data with, I guess, more or less, suitable or effective cover crops. So if you had a cover crop that barely grew at all, you had 10% germination or very little growth, maybe you planted it late, then the results of the model would not be so reliable. They'd probably be overestimating the effect of that cover crop. There is not a way to currently to change. The user doesn't have an option to change, like, okay, my cover crop is only half as big as it should be or grew half as much. We don't have a mechanism for you to put that information in. So I hope that answered the question.
I was just muted. To me, that sounded pretty good. And folks can write follow-up if need be. Great. Well, we have quite a bit of
I do have a couple of summary slides. I think we have time for that. But I wanted to make sure to get to the questions first.
Yeah. And we don't have any questions right now. So folks, think of your questions, jot them down while Peter goes through the last few slides.
Okay. So hopefully you're seeing the slide now that says utility at the top.
That's right.
Great. So just a little bit of a summary here of utility and limitations. And I say tools like fast greenhouse gas. These apply definitely to this tool, but we should remember that all tools have their limitations. So some of the benefits is you can use this tool to make estimates of the average benefit of some of these common practices. Another benefit is you can help identify some of the possible benefits and challenges with greenhouse gas mitigation strategies. So we saw, for example, that it looks like it's going to make a big difference if you use a legume or a non-legume cover crop. So that might be something to think about. Or if you try out a practice in the tool in your location, like no-till on wheat, in some places you might be getting a yield benefit. In other places, the tool might be suggesting that on average there'd likely be a yield decrease. That might be something you want to look out for in your own fields or the data that you have. Making sure that you have reliable yield data can help think about how to implement these practices effectively. So what I'm trying to say is the tool gives an estimate, the best one that we can, given the information and the limitations of the tool, but it can also be educational. It can help you think about some of those different source categories. So it can be an educational tool, I hope, to think about those source categories and how we might improve a practice to improve the overall results. A limitation of this tool is it doesn't function as verification of mitigation. So we do not recommend using this tool in a carbon or a greenhouse gas payment scheme as is. Again, thinking about that the tool's purpose is to estimate the average benefit of a practice across many farms and many years, that can give an indication of when that result is suitable and useful. And as I tried to explain and hope I've clarified, the online version runs for only one combination of a crop and management practice in a county or a state at a time. So you can run it for all the combinations you like, but each combination has to be run separately. So you have a lot of choices about which tools to use, and I just want to highlight some things I think are really important for any tools, for any projects that are focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We really want to be sure that these greenhouse gas reductions are permanent, real, and verifiable. So these are short words, but there's a lot associated with each of them. As I mentioned, in terms of permanence, climate change is a long-term issue, so the solutions also need to be long-term. In terms of making sure it's real, we want to include all three greenhouse gases. In agriculture, it's really important that we include nitrous oxide and methane. The FAST greenhouse gas tool focuses on nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide because those are the ones that are important for commodity crop production. If we were including manure in the tool, then we would need to include methane as well. And tools that focus on livestock, it's important that they do a good job with methane. Something else we need to think about is making sure that emissions don't just shift from one place to another. So if New York State had a goal of reducing emissions of greenhouse gases from agriculture, we could just stop agriculture in New York State. Terrible idea in my opinion, but it would reduce greenhouse gas emissions in New York State. But it wouldn't really be reducing greenhouse gas emissions globally because the demand for all those crops is still going to be there. And production is going to occur and greenhouse gas emissions will occur somewhere. So for projects that are, especially when we get into payment schemes or quantifying greenhouse gas benefits, then we have to think about, can we really meter these or monitor them or measure them? And this is a real challenge. Greenhouse gas measurements are expensive, and nitrous oxide and methane are quite variable in the space and time where they're produced. So that's the end of my presentation. I just want to acknowledge Atkinson Center. I want to also acknowledge our advisory committee members. So we had several folks from Environmental Defense Fund, Nature Conservancy, and Cornell University, as well as some other faculty who helped us out with the tool development. But all the mistakes belong to the three of us listed at the bottom of the slide. For further information, you might like to look at the blog that my close colleague Jennifer Whiteman maintains. That's the top one. Information about webinar series related to climate change and recordings of previous webinars and other materials. And here's the link for the FAST greenhouse gas tool. You probably can also just Google FAST-GHG and you should find the Cornell Atkinson Center. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter. That was excellent. We had one more question slash comment, and I have already copied and saved it for you. The person says, thank you very much. Happy to connect on tool development, and provided their LinkedIn contact information. Kind regards, they said. So you have one request for a follow-up conversation. Isn't that nice?
Great.
Right is right. So folks, I hope you've had a chance to jot down those links or just the keywords there to do more follow-up per Peter's suggestion. And now we're just have one slide left ourselves, and I'm going to share my screen. And before you leave, do click on that survey link there and be entered into complete it, and then be entered into the $25 gift card opportunity. We thank you for that. Aisha.
All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, you want to say, Aisha, thank you, Peter. That was a lovely talk today. I learned so much, and we really appreciate hearing from you.
Great, thanks for the invitation, and congratulations on what I think is a very successful series you have here.
Thank you, Peter. Aisha.
Thank you, Peter. Well, thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. Here are some next steps in our collective outcomes quantification journey. So first, we look forward to you joining us at some or all of the next set of tools training webinars that will be held on the first Wednesday of every month. If you can't make it to one or more of the webinars, but want to view the sessions, the recording should be available by the following Monday. Second, at the end of the webinar, please share your feedback with us by answering a quick 8-question survey. I shared the link at the beginning of the session, and it will also appear as a new tab in your internet browser when the webinar ends. Please take a couple of minutes to share your feedback so we can keep improving these events. And don't forget that you will be entered into a drawing for a gift card for just filling out the survey. So we thank you in advance for your participation, and good luck. Also, Michelle and I are offering free coaching services to 6 farm project managers who secure a session with us. These sessions are individually tailored to you in order to help you figure out which tools or methods are right for your project. If you're interested, just email me, Aisha Ross, and in the subject line, write coaching request. And finally, if you'd like a free print copy of the guide to be mailed to you, You can place that order online at the report's website, which you can easily find using the keywords AFT Outcomes Tools. So thank you again for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you on March 6th.
Excellent, thank you. And everybody, Aisha's referring to, of course, this fuzzy version of the Outcomes Estimation Tools Guide, a guide to water quality, climate, social, and economic outcomes estimation tools. And this is the book, the report that kicked off this webinar series.